a hibiscus flower painting. Today I have an easy watercolor tutorial for you. Welcome back to my channel. If we have not met before, my name is Michelle. On this channel you'll find watercolor tuition, drawing, a little bit of mixed media, even some business and motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the little bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. Make at least one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content for Patreon subscribers. Now, coming up on YouTube this year, I want to give you lots more really simple tutorials, really little quick wins that you can learn something and also produce some lovely small pieces of art. So I've got a flower tutorial for you this week. Now, we actually are going to start this flower painting from the point of the background already being done. You have options here. You can either find the tutorial I did for this bokeh background. I'll link to it in the video description here, or you can just search for it on my channel. So there's a full tutorial for this background. Because this flower is pink, you could also do this just with a clean white background, or you could use one of the other background tutorials on my channel. I would generally suggest though that if you are going to do a background, you do that first. And we're going to start this tutorial with the drawing. So here's my inspiration both for the background bokeh tutorial and for this tutorial. I'm going to do the flower a little bit smaller. Now you see that some of these background leaves and buds are out of focus. What I did, if you can't see what a leaf is like ever, just Google it and you'll see, loads of photographs. That's the wonder of the internet. So I actually found, what shape the leaves are. I'll just do one or two leaves and buds. I'm going to keep those quite clear. And again, I'm going to do this flower. I'm going to move it slightly further over to the left and keep it really simple. Now, the easiest way to draw a flower is to draw the outside shape first and then to draw the center. So let me show you how that works. So you just look at your flower and you imagine you are drawing, some kind of box around it. What would that box, a multi-sided box as well, it doesn't have to just have four sides. What would that box look like if it were drawn around the outside of the flower petals? Then you want to find whereabouts the center is. Now we can see that it's further towards the base, and I think I'm trying to see if it's further towards right or left. We can measure. It's a little further to the left, so we've got something like this going on. So that's what we're going to start with. From there, it's an easy matter of just throwing our petals outwards. And this is how you make flowers look like they're facing in the right direction. I've shown you this in other flower painting tutorials, and then we've got that lovely stamen coming up the center. And I should say at this point, it may not be a stamen. I know nothing, literally nothing about the botanics of flowers. I'm just okay at drawing them. So let's get our flower drawn. I want to think whereabouts we want it on the paper first of all. So I'm going to say to myself, well, I don't want it coming up any higher than this. I don't want it coming sort of any further over than this really. And as I said, I'm just going to get an idea of how that outside shape would look, being very, very light here. So I'm going to sketch in like this and then put my center in towards the bottom and over to the left. I'm going to draw from there. With all petals, you get sort of almost a center line to them. Now that may be a physical line that you can see, or it may just be an idea of a line, and we're going to go from there. The actual center of this flower, actually, though it is here, it kind of more faces that way, so I'm going to put it in like that. And then we've got this petal here, which is a bit foreshortened, and you want to get the actual shape of the petal first before you worry about putting in any of those circular bits. And where they overlap each other, you can just draw across the top. So again, I'm coming out the middle here. I'm using a 5B pencil. I would advise you to use a slightly harder pencil than this. It doesn't really matter what you use, but don't press too hard. And I tend to use a slightly darker pencil when I'm filming because it enables you to see better on the internet, but it is a little bit more smudgy, as you can see. So again, just going out here, and once you've got those shapes, you can work in and get those sort of frills. It doesn't have to be, it needs to look like the sort of flower that it is, but it does not have to be an exact replica of the very petal shapes that you see here. Obviously, if you have time, I'm doing a quick YouTube tutorial, but if you have time and you want to be more botanically accurate, then that's something you could do. Remember, always getting that center line of the petal, and then when you have one that overlaps another, just draw over the top and around you go. So I've got an idea here of a nice hibiscus shaped flower. I feel like this petal here could be a bit longer, so I'm just going to take that out further. What I'm going to do now is just erase these construction lines and go over each petal a little bit more carefully with my pencil so that it looks a bit cleaner and we don't have all of this scruffiness going on. So I've cleaned up my drawing a bit. Do remember that I have to draw darker on camera than you will need to draw. So draw as lightly as you need to so that you can see, but you don't want excess pencil on your paper. As I said, if I drew like that, you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. I have also got a piece of what we like to refer to in the UK as kitchen paper. This would be paper towel. We call it kitchen paper no matter which room it's in. It always remains kitchen paper. I have no idea why this is the case. So what we're going to do now is some leaves and also this stamen. Now, I've got a bit of a composition problem here. It's not too much of a problem, but everything's a bit over this side on purpose because I want to showcase the background. But what will help this is if we take this center stem or stamen and we take it up and point it sort of towards that other area there. Now, if we try and go around things, it's going to be quite difficult. So what you want to do is, you know, it comes up quite high here. Just want to almost take it up just like that, and what you can do is afterwards you can just erase the other lines that it goes through. Generally when things come up and out like this, they get a little bit narrower towards the end, and we've got this fabulous bit here where it breaks into. We've also got lots of little bits on the side here, which I'm going to do in a minute in masking fluid. I'm not going to bother drawing those because I think that it will be easy for me to just draw them straight in with the masking fluid, but if you need to draw them first, by all means do that. Now here we can see we've got this petal goes behind, so we need to erase that line. Don't worry if you get rid of a bit of the line you've drawn. You can just then put that back in, neaten it all up, and you're ready. So I'm going to put now some leaves in the background. I think we'll have one coming out here. You want to consider stems as well. Everything comes from the center of a flower, so it needs to have something holding it up, even though we're only showing a little bit of the stems. There's a hint of something coming down here, which is probably what goes up to the center of this flower. So just sort of imagine something coming here, and I'm going to draw a stem here. Also, that idea of things getting narrower as they go towards the stem and up and out. And I've got some buds in here as well, so let's place some of those in. And again, I did a little bit of a Google search and I sort of saw what those buds look like. So I'm going to draw this one going behind here. And they've got these little bits that come out at the side as well. Almost like a little ruffle, a little collar on the bud. So I'm going to do some of those. I'm also going to get some leaves in. I think I'll have one sort of coming towards us over here that we can just see part of. And we'll have the center of it coming down here. And there's a leaf over the back here. Again, let's get the idea that some stems are coming up there and get the idea of that leaf going away from us a little bit. It's possible here to get in a bit of a muddle with the drawing, so keep things at this point quite simple. Now, it doesn't really show in the original photograph, but I think I'll have a nice full-size leaf coming down here, so we'll bring it out from behind there. You know, if ever you need to, you can sort of almost start the drawing behind like that, and then we'll come down like this. And I had a look at these hibiscus leaves, and they tend to have a bit of a serration towards the edge, so we're going to put some serration on there. You'll notice how I just did the shape of it first, because that's the easiest way of getting it right, is to just do that sort of outline shape. And then with the hibiscus leaves, all the veins come from the center, so we'll have something like this coming up from the bottom, and then they come up, and they're fairly symmetrical, by which I mean they come out of that center line roughly opposite each other, not exactly but roughly opposite. Have this little line here for where it goes behind, and I'm going to get on, and I think just in order that we've got something, you know, joining it to the base here, there's a hint of a leaf that's sort of on the side here. So we'll put that coming down as well. And I'm going to do one or two more buds. And I think I've got this bud here, that would be off the paper, but I think I'll bring one up further here, just because I think it'll be nicer for the composition. At this point, if you're enjoying this video, can I ask you, as I always do, to click that like button, that thumbs up button. If you can like, share, subscribe, or leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people, and more people will get to see my painting tutorials, which enables my channel to grow, which enables me to make more videos for you. So that's our drawing done. What we're going to do now is apply a tiny bit of masking fluid, and I do mean a tiny bit of masking fluid. You know, if I had a good old British pound for every time I'd seen somebody tear their paper by putting too much masking fluid on, I would be a lot richer than I am now, and you would see me wearing some kind of diamond tiara and filming in a castle. So a small amount of masking fluid, it's just going to preserve that stamen, which is going to enable us to put the background in cleanly. As I said, the background isn't included in this tutorial, but you can go back and watch that one afterwards if you'd like to. So my drawing is done. At this stage, I'm going to apply some masking fluid to this center part here, and maybe to one or two of these little bits that are sticking out here. As I said, mostly I'll just paint round, but I just want to mask out those very tiny areas. So I've got a couple of bottles of masking fluid here. Now I've got the Schminky. I actually, it's a good masking fluid, but the Schminky blue does tend to stain the paper. However, I can't seem to get the lid off my Schminky white at the moment. Years ago, I tore the ligament in this finger here, punching someone at Kung Fu. So that, you know, serves me right entirely. And now I pay the price of not being able to get the lid off things because I just can't grip very tight. But there are plenty of other brands of masking fluid as well, and the blue ones are usually fine. They colour them so that you can see them more clearly on the paper. For some reason I just seem to have a bit of an issue with this Schminky one. Like I said, staining the paper, but martial arts injuries are a thing, so here we go. Now you'll see that I'm using this ruling pen to apply with. This is a draftsman's tool, but it's been kind of snaffled, shall we say, by artists because it's brilliant for applying masking fluid. You could use anything. You could use a toothpick. You don't necessarily want to use your best brush for this because you'll be putting it in the bin afterwards. People do say that if you put a little bit of dish soap on first, it'll resist and it'll make it okay, but I would never risk that on a brand new nice brush, shall we say. You might want to experiment with an older brush. I actually just prefer, this is my favourite tool for applying this. There are other tools that you can use as well, including you get something called colour shapers, which are for blending pastels. They're sort of little silicone rubber tipped things. You can use those as well. I'm just going to apply this masking fluid here, and I'm just going to draw with it and just come out where I've got those little tiny bits that would be very hard, well, almost impossible really, to paint round with a nice loose wash. So we're going to put those in there, going to put lots of those in, and then we're going to allow this to dry. If something happens with this masking fluid and you spill a bit of it, or you know, you get something wrong, the absolute last thing you want to do is to try and get that off your paper. Don't scrub at it, just leave it until it's dry and then it will peel off. But if you start messing around with it and pushing it into your paper, you'll never see the last of it. So I'm going to carry on now and just mask out this center stamen. At this point we're going to choose our colours. Now don't worry if you don't have the same colours as me. I'll leave some alternatives in the video description, and I'll give you some as I'm choosing as well. And these will have been the same colours that I used in the background. It's really important for a piece of art that it looks cohesive, that everything is kind of linked together. So you never want to do a background of completely different colours to everything you've used in the foreground. So let's have a look at our colours and swatch them now. So let's swatch the colours we're going to use. I have grabbed a lemon yellow simply because I want to get some coolness in the background areas. This is a really cheap one. This is just a White Nights by St. Petersburg, but actually for cheap paints they really are quite strongly pigmented. I chose it very carefully by it being the closest one to hand. I've got a darker yellow, so this is a diarylide yellow by Jackman's Art Materials. We're going to need that to get some of these warmer yellows in the background here, these ones up here, and also we're going to need it perhaps in our leaves and for these little tips on the stamen here. I have got Permanent Rose, again by Jackman's, because it's going to be just about the best colour for our flower. We can adjust it and make it a little more lilac in places by using some of this cerulean blue I have. Again, I think this is a Jackman's colour, and we can use it in the background to make some greens, but we can also mix it in, make some lilacs on our flower. There are hints of lilac in places. I have a darker blue. I have some ultramarine green shade. This again is from Jackman's. It's in a little pot because it's just a sample. It's a fantastic colour. I really must get onto them to send me some more. And there we are. We can make greens with that and do all sorts of things with it too. And the last colour that I have chosen is Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey is super useful. We can put darks in the background, but it will also make greens. It's majority blue pigment, so we can get some lovely, strong, dark, sort of dull greens in the background too. So it's time to get on with painting our flower. I'm also going to be using a little bit of watercolour pencil, and that's going to enable us to really simply get those lines on the flower petals. We're going to paint this flower in a really simple manner, but it's still going to look incredibly beautiful. So time to paint our flower. The very first thing I'm going to do actually is take an eraser around some of these petals. The background is bone dry, it was left overnight, and I'm going to remove as much as I can of the pencil. I mean, don't obsess about this because you can end up sort of, messing up your paper. I'm going to be very careful not to take the eraser over this bit of masking fluid here. I'm going to paint this petal first because I want to get this masking fluid off at the earliest possible time because I don't want it left on my paper too long. It's already been on overnight. This masking fluid over here, I can just remove that now because the only purpose of this masking fluid here was to reserve the background colour. I'm getting some smudging going on there just with the pencil. It's sometimes easier to remove this with an eraser than with your fingers actually. So I'm going to start by painting this petal here, and I'm going to be using my pink. I've just got myself out a new brush. I don't know if you're like me, but I never want to start a new brush. I keep them for ages with this bit of plastic on, and then I'm spending ages just using awful old brushes, but this is a new one. I mean, I don't know why I do this. I think it's just a throwback from when I was just like incredibly broke. I don't even have to pay, luckily, for these brushes anymore because this is part of the brush set that I designed, so I'm lucky enough to get sent brushes for nothing now, but still this tightness with the brushes persists. Now, I am filming this video slightly out of order. I tend to film lots of different tutorials at the same time, so I can't recall if I mentioned that we're going to use a watercolour pencil. Tiny bit of pencil left here, but it was the best colour. I must get one of those pencil extenders that holds them, but anyway, I've sharpened it so it's got quite a fine point on. I can't even see what colour this is. There's a colour number on it. It's just a pink basically, so let's get a piece of paper and let's swatch that. So it's just a pink. You can use a pink, you could use some kind of dark crimson red. If you're doing this particular colour flower, you want to avoid anything like an orangey red. You could also use something like a lilac because there is actually a lot of lilac sort of colour in these flowers as well. So we've got this bright pink down the base here, but we've got some hints of lilac up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by wetting this petal with clean water, and I'm going to take the water on like this. Now I could actually do this petal in sort of two sections because it's divided by that masking fluid, but I'm going to keep it simple. I am going to take some pink up to the end. It's not going to stay white, so I'm not going to bother to wet all the way up. What I want to do then is get real strong pink here in this part down here. So I'm going to get paint, it's dried slightly overnight, but I'm going to get paint basically that is pretty strong and hasn't got a lot of water in. So it doesn't matter if you're using pan paints or tube paints, you can do exactly the same thing. And we're going to get that strong colour here, and I'm going to start bringing it up. It is a very strong colour, so at this point I'm going to clean most of the pink off my brush. I'm going to start spreading it up like this. I want there to be like a hint of lilac in the middle here, so the easiest way of doing that is actually to get a little bit of my blue like this, and when that hits the pink it will just turn into lilac. Now you always want to be thinking ahead. I've got these little stamen bits around here, and they're going to be, I just want to get rid of that blue and go back to a little bit of pink here. They're going to be white mostly with little yellow ends, and so I want them to show up. Now if the paint around them isn't very dark, they're not going to show up much, so I will go just a little bit heavier over that bit in a second. You want to avoid any puddles forming. I have some paper towel on hand so I can dab my brush on it, and I'm just going to exaggerate the dark up the center of this flower in order to give a bit more drama to those little white bits when we take the masking fluid off. And I'm also going to use my watercolor pencil. I'm not going to use it too much on this petal because it can actually lift the masking fluid if you go over it too heavily. So you want to go over that quite lightly, and we're going to use this just to bring some lines up. See how effective it is. You would never get such tiny fine lines if you were working with a brush. So I'm going to take that round there, and I just want to get some of that creasing that's on the edge of the petal there, like so. I don't want to work on it for too long. You see I'm working into wet paint here. Just going to get a bit more blue and just darken over that far side, and just make sure that there aren't any puddles left. When you get this sort of spreading out effect, that's because the paint's a little on the wet side. Now a bit of that can actually look quite pretty, and there are petals such as lilies where that happens all the time, but we don't want too much of it happening on this particular flower, so I'm going to keep that under control. What I want to do now is I want to paint each petal individually, so I am not going to paint this petal next to this wet one here. What will happen if I do that is this paint will bleed into this damp paint here. So I'm going to pick a petal now which is completely separate from this one. That would be this one over here. I'm going to prepare it exactly the same as before, and then I'll show you how I paint that one. So if you look at this petal over here, there's very little dark in it, just a little bit down at the base here. So we're going to do the same again. I've got 2 water jars on hand, so you'll see the one that I've been using to dip my brush in has gone pink already. So I've got another one so that I've got clean water always to hand. If you're not in some kind of circumstance like, an art class where space is limited, you always want to have more than 1 water jar. It just makes things easier. I'm going to take water just over that center part of the petal. I'm not taking it right up to the edge because I might not be able to see where I was going with it, and that would mean that the water might go over the edge of the petal and the paint would just follow it. So again, I'm going to get some nice dark paint here, and always thinking ahead. So this light petal here is going to be shown up by this dark along the edge here, and I'm going to do the same as before. Keep this petal quite light though, and just taking that in there, and you'll see that none of what's going on here is touching this other petal, so we don't have to worry about any bleeding going on. And then as I come up here, I'm just going to rinse my brush and dry slightly, and then start spreading upwards and outwards. Now see how I've gone off the edge of the water here, so we're getting a hard edge, so I want to make sure I take that right to the edge there, and just as I did with the other one, I'm going to get that touch of lilac in the middle just by picking up a little bit of blue on my paintbrush, and it's a cerulean blue I'm using here, so it's a really delicate blue. I don't have to worry that I'm suddenly going to go in, way too heavily, and just get a little bit more very pale pink paint. I'm just going to spread this out to the edge here. Want to make sure you do go right to the edges, otherwise you'll get a little hard drying line where you stop. Even if you wanted it to be white, you want to continue with clean water so that you don't get those drying lines within the petals. And then what I'm going to do now is just take this watercolor pencil, and looking very closely at what's going on with the petal itself, I'm going to take this round. You want to be thinking about the direction that the flower petal is actually growing in. If there are any bits where it sort of wiggles a bit, you can get those as well, so you can use this in order to get an idea of the shape of the petal. Not going to overdo that too much. I'd like a bit more of this dark pink coming up the center here, just a little bit more. Just seems to stop rather abruptly there, so I'm just going to bring this up a tiny bit here. I'm going to clean and dry my brush so I can blend up a bit. Be careful not to get any puddles on your paper. And there comes a point where you need to stop working on it. So I'm happy with that petal now. What I'm going to do is let those 2 dry before I work on any of the other petals that are touching them. This petal here has some little turned over edges. What I'll do there is I'll paint those very, very pale pink, let them dry, and then I'll paint the main part of the petal so that we get these little light bits here where the petal is tipping over. So I'm going to get on and complete the rest of the petals, and then it'll be time to remove this stamen masking fluid and to put the details in on that. So my flower's dry and I've taken off the masking fluid. It's come off really cleanly. I used an eraser to lift that off, so that's really good. When I say I let things dry, do understand that I mean I let them completely dry, sometimes for an hour or even several hours or overnight. It's very easy when watching a video to think it's just a few minutes, but you can get into a lot of trouble that way. What I want to do now is just put a hint of pink along the base of this this little stem coming out the middle here. And then we've got the little bits that come out. They're mostly, I'm just looking at the picture off camera. I'll bring it on so you can see. They're mostly white. We've got one or two pink ones up here. And then we've got this dark yellow here. And we'll use the diarylide yellow for that. So what I'm going to do first of all is I want to keep this stem fairly light. If I just paint it pink, you know, it's not going to look any different to the flower that it's around. I could go up the side of it with watercolor pencil, but I think since I've got such a nice new brush out with a fine point on, I'm just going to get a bit of paint on the end of it. I'm keeping my brush really dry. If the brush is wet, then what will happen is that pink paint will just spread, you know, right across the stem. And what I'm going to do now is just go up one side of it and just allow it to bleed up very slightly. If it's not bleeding at all, I can manipulate that further. I'm going to sort of stop and start here as well, because there are areas where these little white bits cross over in front. So I want to make sure that, you know, I make it look fairly realistic. I'm going to have a little bit of pink on these up here as well, I think. I'm just going to clean my brush and just use a stamp brush to blend in places with that. And just to soften along here as well. Like so. So we want that hint of pink on the stem, but still keeping it light enough that it shows up behind. What I'm going to do now is get some of the yellow, and again that's dried, so I'm just putting a tiny little bit of water on my brush, and then I'm going to just drop in with quite strong colour here, because obviously yellow's a light colour, so we want to go fairly strong here, and I'll just literally drop in to the ends like this. So we're nearly finished. It's time to get on with doing our leaves and buds. Again, we're going to keep these really simple, because the main event here is the background and the flower itself. So I did drop a few little bits of pink and let it mix with the yellow just to make a bit of a darker orange in places there, and just the tiniest bit of yellow and even a little bit of green from my palette that had just formed naturally, a bit of green, bit of grey, just to sort of knock out the pure white of that stem, but with leaving some in. We're going to go on now to do the buds and the leaves. What I want to do is keep the buds lighter and have the leaves slightly darker, and we'll keep the stems lighter as well. So we're taking quite a simplistic approach, and this will enable us just to get a very clean effect. We've got enough going on in this picture without having a lot going on with the leaves, so we're going to keep them really simple. I'm going to start by mixing a lighter green. So I'm going to get my lemon yellow, which I haven't used that much of yet, and it's really important that you change your water at this point. And see how I've got some pink here. Don't allow any pink on your palette to pollute the green, because they're opposite colours and it will dull it down. So I'm going in like this with my lemon, and then I'm going to use my cerulean. Again, don't mix on top of your work like this. I'm only doing it so that you can see. We're going to mostly have the lemon and just a touch of the cerulean. We get this nice sort of bright, almost lime green here going on. And I'm going to paint it across the buds here. As before, make sure that you lift out any pencil around the edges first of all. You won't always get all of the pencil out, so don't scrub your paper to the point of damaging it. I do want some darker lines on these buds later on, but we'll do that when we mix up some more dark paint. So for now, I'm just going to keep the paint on the buds as a flat colour. I'm also going to use this colour to paint the stems, and because I want the stems to look a little bit three-dimensional, what I'll do is I'll just take a bit of cerulean on my brush down one side. So we need it nice and light and bright there. I'm avoiding those little bits around the edge of the bud there. And I'm just going to get a bit of cerulean on my brush and just take it down one side like so. So that we just get a little bit of three dimensions. I could put it, if I wanted to, underneath a dark leaf where there might be some shadow. And I'm going to go on and paint all of the buds in that first coat of paint, and the stems as well. So I'm going to mix up a darker colour for the leaves here, and Let's do this one here. Again, it goes without saying, don't paint a leaf if there's a stem next to it that's damp, so you want to make sure it's dry. I'm keeping these lines here so I can still see where I've drawn, but I'm making them fainter because the paint will tend to trap them in. I'm going to use a different method. We used watercolour pencil to get some lines on the petals. I find that tends to not look as good on leaves because lines on petals tend to be soft and they tend to be a little bit harder on leaves. So what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to, there's several things I could do, including just using a paintbrush, but I'm actually going to use a craft knife and I'm going to score the paper. So what I'm going to do here is, it's hard to see the angle sometimes on camera, but I'm not holding it to cut like this, I'm holding it on the side. So if you're not sure about this technique, do practice it first. And I'm going to just score, I'm going next to those pencil marks rather than straight on top of them because we don't want to trap those in either. And I'm just taking almost like a scratch. Be careful you don't cut your paper along like this. And what will happen is that the paint will sit in the little dips that are made by scoring, and it should cause a very subtle dark line to appear once I've done that scoring. And don't worry if you're not completely accurate. It's quite hard to be accurate with a knife. We can take out as much pencil as will come out without damaging the paper. I'm now going to get some of this ultramarine, and I could use the darker yellow, but I'd get a very warm colour there. I think I actually want to carry on using the lemon. It won't matter that we've got a little bit of cerulean in there, so I'm going to get some of this here, which is the ultramarine. This is ultramarine green shade, but don't worry too much about that. Any ultramarine will give you a sort of natural looking green. Again, you're going to need a lot of yellow in there. I'm going to put a little bit more water in that and we'll start applying it and we'll see how it looks. I think I want to go a tiny bit darker, and let's try that. So I'm going to take it all the way across this leaf, really simply without doing anything else, just painting it on from one side to the other. It's nice and dark, so we can sort of use it to almost crisp up and clean up the edge of that petal. And I'm going to come around like this and paint down the middle here. Now you can, if you want to get a bit of variation in that colour, you could go into a bit more yellow perhaps in the middle here, or a bit more water to lighten it. The bit that's closest to you will generally be the bit that's lightest, so we could go in like this, and then we'll just bring that paint down and go back to that darker colour. Make sure that you don't have a puddle here forming. That middle bit isn't too wet. So if ever you notice puddles forming, then just use a dried brush with the water squeezed out of it just to dab, and that will sort of suck up the excess water and paint just like a little vacuum cleaner. And so we're going to bring this down like this. Now those lines are showing up a little bit in places where we've got the yellow, which is a bit opaque. They're showing up a little bit less. What you can also do is put them in whilst the paint is wet. So I'm going to just put a bit more of the ultramarine on. So I'm going to just go a little bit stronger with this. Again, making sure that I don't leave puddles. So when we go darker, and the ultramarine pigments are larger than the lemon pigments, and so they'll tend to gather in those little dips. I'm a little worried there's too much water, so I'm just going to sweep out a bit. And you can see you start to get those dark lines appearing. I'm going to manipulate it further by going on top again with my knife. Some of them are showing up, others aren't, so we can go a little bit more heavy on top of those ones. And you see those pigments just sitting in those dips there. Sometimes it'll go light for a moment, but it should go back to dark again. Another thing that works well is to take another layer of colour over the top. So if it hasn't shown up enough, just let it dry and then put another layer on top. And again, you can manipulate it by getting, a little bit of dark paint in areas. Look at that, that's so cute, isn't it? And you're starting to get this kind of natural linear look appearing. So I'm going to let that one dry, and I'm going to put the other leaves in. What I'll do then as well is I will paint this slightly darker colour around the buds here where we had those little bits that come out. We'll put those in like so. That one's not showing up too well because it's on a dark area, but most of them should show up absolutely fine, just like that. So leaves almost finished. I've been sort of fairly naturalistic looking with them. There were places where the background had kind of splashed over the top. I just want them to fade into the background. I don't want them to be, you know, super bright and vibrant. I am just going to add a little bit of detail to some of these buds here. And you'll notice that in places where I had these little outside spikes, these tiny little leaves that surround the buds, I purposely went slightly more with the yellow behind there. It's important, you know, if you're looking at painting two areas essentially the same colour, it's important that one is lighter or darker than the other so that you can see the difference. So all I'm going to do now is put a bit of detail on these buds, and I think I'm going to just use a bit of the cerulean. It's got a touch of yellow in, but that's fine. It's going to go green when it hits the bud anyway. So what I'm going to do is just sort of take a line up for sort of maybe a section, and then I'm just going to get my brush and go the other side with some clean water and just let that spread across. What you'll get then is you'll get a line that's hard-edged on one side and softer on the other. You can do this sort of thing anywhere that you see that there might be a delineation in the bud. Let's put another one up around here, and then we'll just soften it over to one side with a bit of water. So you just end up with this very subtle shaping to the buds. I'm going to put one or two lines on the others, and then we should be done. Now my painting's finished. In places it's still slightly damp, so I'm not going to try and remove any more pencil at this point. There may be little bits of pencil that I can still get off, but it's best not to obsess about it because you can end up smudging and damaging your work even when it's dry. One thing I do want to do, you see it's not part of this tutorial, it's part of the other tutorial, the background, but I've got a bit of pencil here on this white area and it just won't erase. So I am actually going to get a little bit of white paint and dab that out. Now I wouldn't normally do that, except I've already used white paint in this background, so that's going to be fine. I wouldn't necessarily grab white paint and put it on a painting that didn't have it, because you can end up with it looking a bit like typewriter correction fluid if you are old enough to remember such things. Aren't we lucky to have computers now? So overall, really happy with the effect of this painting. So do let me know if you enjoyed this flower painting tutorial, and let me know any other subjects that you would like me to cover as well this year. Before you leave this tutorial, don't forget to click the down arrow and have a look in the video description. I've got lots of free things for you there, even a free course. If you can't see any of the things that I point to here on YouTube because you're watching on a television screen, I've recently got, you know, a big TV screen in my other room, and I started watching YouTube and I thought you can't see any of the stuff. So if that's the case, do feel free just to head straight over to my website. You'll find links to everything that I do over there. Don't forget, if you're interested in flower painting, I have a full flower painting course. It's all about painting flowers in watercolor pencils. It's a great starting point if you're feeling a little bit nervous of paints and you want to get a little bit more control. I'll link to that one as well in the video description, and it's on my website. If you just want to find out a few more of my favorite flower painting techniques, you can watch another video right now.